welcome to The Hope-Filled Romantic, where faith and fiction meet real-life love stories. I'm your host, Heather Tabers, and each week we'll sit down with Christian romance authors to talk about the swoon-worthy relationships in their books and the sometimes messy, always meaningful love stories in real life. This girl believes that every love story, real or fictional, begins with hope. So cue the heart flutters. The next chapter begins now. Emily Ann is a historical fiction writer with a passion for bringing the past to life through compelling characters and immersive storytelling. Growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, she developed a deep appreciation for history and culture, which inspires her writing. Emily holds a bachelor's degree in education and homeschools her own children. She loves her church community and enjoys gardening, crocheting, and photography. Emily, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today and being my
Thank
second podcast guest.
you for having me. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Congratulations. I know today is the release day for your debut novel, If I Go. Do you
Yeah,
have a copy of that with you by chance?
right here.
Love it. Congratulations. It's so exciting.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'm so excited.
Can you tell us a bit about the story and what inspired it?
Yeah, so I came up with a story in high school actually. We went to Fort Sumter, which is where the first shots of the Civil War were, all that happened. And so it was on one of these trips where I was just inspired by, I guess, the history and just the stories of all these people. And I just had this idea of what if there was a boy and a girl separated by this conflict that had separated the whole country. Um, so yeah, the story is about Eleanor Davis, who is this girl right here, and Fred, who's back there. And and Eleanor's, they both kind of grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, which is where I grew up. And Eleanor's family stays in the South, and she grows up to be a Confederate nurse. And then Fred's family, when he's about 12 years old, they decide to move up north due to the politics of what's happening in the country. And so they go 10 years without seeing each other, and then they reunite on the battlefield as a Confederate nurse and as a Union soldier, and the story kind of takes off from there. So
Wow, that sounds exciting. It's interesting to me that most historical romances are actually set during a time of war. For some reason, war is just so romantic in the books,
yeah,
not necessarily in real life. What do you think draws us to romance set during times of hardship?
yeah. So I really believe that having kind of the backdrop of a war, there's a lot of ultimatums and stressful situations that make people speak their mind and act out, maybe more, I guess, directly, less hesitant to communicate their feelings and stuff because there's more at stake.
That's
You're
so
not just
true.
seeing somebody on a day-to-day basis. Like, you might go a long time without seeing them again, or you might never see them again, and so you're more likely to communicate how you're what your heart's really feeling. I mean, I definitely, and I think too, it's such a contrast. War is like, destructive, and then love is creating and beautiful. And so when you have those two meet, it makes for a really good story all the time, I think.
Those are really good points, thinking about how, when a soldier goes off to war, he doesn't know if he's going to be able to return, and you have to get in those words and you have to make those commitments while you have the opportunity. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
And I think when tensions are high, emotions are high. And so that just, like you said, it raises the stakes and it makes the romance just even more enticing and even more fun to read.
Yes, I definitely agree.
So your story takes place during one of the darkest times in American history. How does faith sustain your characters through the war and through heartbreak?
So I think for my characters, especially, faith is something that they definitely lean on through these hard times. Um, they kind of see the sovereignty of, God, and accept and embrace their faith in that, God is constant. He never changes. He knows the future. He nothing surprises God. And so there are times when my characters really have to lean on their faith and just trust that everything's going to work out. And when things seem like it's super dark and just terrible, just having faith and hope that God has a plan for them and for even the country. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson for all of us today as well, whether you're married or I think it's for any relationship, not just romantic relationships, but
Of
just knowing
course.
that things can be hard, things can be messy, things can be difficult, but there's still hope and God has a plan and that even while things might surprise us, things may seem completely like hope is lost to us, nothing surprises God and he still has a plan and he's still on the throne. And while our country may not be in a literal civil war right now, there's definitely lines drawn and people taking sides in our nation, and we're definitely in need of healing now, just like we were during the Civil War. So, I'm sure it was interesting while you were doing research and trying to explore this idea of national healing alongside personal
Yeah.
healing. What stood out to you while you were doing that research?
One thing that was very unique about the Civil War that we read about, which I'll, bring back around at the end of this, but it was brother fighting brother,
Yeah.
like cousins on opposite sides. People left their home to go fight for the other side, like, left
Yeah.
their families and stuff because they felt so strongly about it. And, we read about that in textbooks and stuff, and it just
Mhm.
seems so bizarre, like that people would be willing to make this big separation. But then you look at, people nowadays, there's such a divide, like you were saying, and
Yeah.
there are family members who will cut each other off for political points,
Mhm.
perspectives or whatever. And so while the Civil War seems so unique and that it did split a country apart, I think if we're being honest with ourselves, like we are living in this time where there is still such a divide. And I think,
True.
whenever there is a big, political event or, something along those lines, you know, there is grace that has to be shown on both sides.
Yes.
Back
Yes.
then and today, there has to be understanding and forgiveness and, those truths that these characters, had to work through in my book. I think those are truths that we, as a nation still need. The It's still true, and just because all these years have passed and we have modern technology and all that,
Mm.
the human relationship that and that had to develop, and the wisdom and the grace that was shown in that time is still just as important today. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I tried to show that kind of theme in my book, and I hope that people can kind of see the parallel to today's world,
Yeah.
politically and all that. So
They say there's nothing new under the sun, and
yeah,
you can go all the way back to Genesis and read, about jealousy, about anger, about so many things that we still struggle with today. From the beginning of time, we're still struggling with these same things, and so that's
yeah,
why I think it's so important that we look back at history. We look at different wars, different struggles that people have had because there's so many things within those that parallel to what we're going through today and we can learn so much, and if we try to forget about our past, we're going to have to like re-experience everything again, and we have to look back and see what lessons we can learn so we don't repeat the same mistakes.
absolutely. Yes, I agree 100%.
So you mentioned forgiveness, definitely a major theme in life, in the Civil War, and in your book for both the characters and for the nation as it was struggling during that time of the Civil War. Why do you think forgiveness is so essential to both real life romance as well as fictional love stories?
Yeah, so I think forgiveness is one of those things that people often overlook because on the surface it seems like it's more for the person that we're forgiving than
Right.
it is for us. But the truth is, like, forgiveness is, I think, more important for our own conscience and spirit, as it is for the person that we are forgiving. I
Yes.
think that's one of the only ways that we truly grow, um, and move forward. It's a key and a tool to help us kind of propel us into this season of growth, into
Mhm.
like a better version of ourselves.
Right.
And so I think you know in real life, forgiveness is one of these things that um, especially in our day and age, it's just not talked about a lot because it's uncomfortable, and it involves kind of dying to yourself and your own
Mhm.
pride, and putting the relationship first. But in a story too, I think one of the wonderful things about forgiveness is, like I mentioned earlier, it is a key to kind of have that character development and character growth.
Yeah.
It's something that you really see somebody, you have to work through the problems. You've seen them be hurt by this person or an action or whatever, and watching them kind of work through that internally, and then moving on from that point. I think it's a great launch pad for growth, and to kind of keep the story moving in a positive direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think about how hard it would have been like you said, to have, a brother or a father or a cousin or someone that could be sleeping, in the same house as you, or at least, in your same church, or that lives down the road,
Yeah,
someone who has grown up in the same town as you, and for them to leave and go to fight for the other side, the feelings of betrayal, no matter if you're from the north or the south, I am sure there were feelings of betrayal and realizing that person, you might be meeting them on the battlefield, like you mentioned, like how hard that would be. And when all is said and done and the war is over, trying to make peace with that, trying to have grace and understanding and forgiveness that had to be such a difficult thing. It's hard enough now, I think, when you have someone that you love or someone you care about who has completely different beliefs than you,
yeah,
trying to understand that. But to actually meet someone face to face, toe to toe on a battlefield to fight against them in that way, I'm sure
yeah,
forgiveness had to be such a difficult thing. But like
yeah.
you said, also such a great launching pad for character development.
Yeah. When you have high stakes, like we were talking about with the war kind of backdrop, in a novel, it really, like, it's not like you're just forgiving somebody for cutting you off in traffic, or your spouse for making a underhanded comment or whatever. I mean, you're literally killing people, and it's like, oh my gosh, like I can't imagine
Mm-mm.
coming out of that, the digging into your soul and your faith to draw that type of tool up.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine how hard it was, but the truth is that it did happen.
I'm sure people faced backlash too if they did forgive.
Yeah,
If you did forgive the person that fought against, then everybody else that you fought alongside might look at you as a traitor as well. Like the
yeah,
stakes were so high.
yeah, absolutely.
How does God's love influence how your characters learn to love each other in this book?
Yeah, so kind of going back into the grace aspect, nobody is perfect, real or fictional. And so I think the fact that God just has shown us grace time and time again, is willing to take us and embrace us in the midst of our sin. And um, that is a trait that I, try to, push onto my characters and have them kind of show that same grace towards each other. Um, when they don't understand each other, when things get hard, um, you just learning how to love each other in a way that reflects God's love. Um, because, God's love is the only perfect love. We can try our hardest to reach his level of love. The truth is like we're always going to fall short. And something that my pastor says a lot is he says, love is grace meeting truth. And I love that because
Mm.
you see that in this book too, like, showing grace in that, like, accepting, somebody's mistakes and somebody's imperfections, but also like standing by truth and being willing to share truth in a loving and graceful way. That combination had to take place in a lot of my characters as they kind of reconciled differences and stuff like that. So, yeah, I would say, that's the main thing that I try to kind of show God's love and how my characters love. So,
I love that. And speaking of your characters, it sounds like If I Go has both the friends to lovers and the enemies to lovers tropes kind of with the same two people because they were
yeah.
friends in childhood and now they're on opposite sides. So, what was it like writing a story with such conflicting emotions and such conflicting um, pasts and relationships? Like, was that a struggle to write this, or was it fun? Tell me about
Um,
writing those.
yeah, so I think I mean, it was fun for me because it kind of challenged me to
I'm
kind of
sure.
fully dive into each trope, I guess.
Hmm.
With the friends to lovers, like that one was the easiest because you see these characters, you see them, as children, kind of like grow up a little bit together before the war separates them, and so that friendship has already been established. And then when they meet back up, 10 years have passed, and it's kind of like an awakening to the reader because um, you really see the growth that both of these characters have had, whether it's like a good growth or maybe a negative growth, but you see how the world and politics and society has kind of changed them and molded them into these two people that are different people than they were 10 years ago.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's kind of fun to kind of dance between the two and have them kind of almost reintroduce themselves to each other after this time apart. But I will say, like, the friends to lovers part definitely takes hold more than the enemies to lovers because although they are on separate sides, they very quickly are able to kind of slide back into like, okay, like we can be real with each other. We've known each other for so long, like all these things that politics or society has put on us, like we can set that aside because like we know each other. So that was really really fun to write.
I think that's an important lesson too for us, even if we haven't known each other, even if we didn't grow up together, we probably have more in common with people than we have differences. And yet we very often focus on the differences. You go to a different kind of church, you believe in different political leanings, you know, add in anything you want there. We look at the
Right.
differences rather than looking at how much we have in common. So I think that's a really good point for your story to like for them to be able to focus on what they know about each other, what they like about each other, and less on the fact that they're on different sides of this war because wars end. Politics
Yeah.
change, presidents change, people change, churches, all these things change. So maybe we should help ourselves and make the world a little bit of a better place by looking at what we have in common and finding common
Yeah.
ground with people so that we can love them right where they're at.
Exactly. And I think we too are just a product of our circumstances so much in our
Yes.
environment, you know, especially my main character, Eleanor, you know, she grew up with this mindset that her family had. She just adopted it because that was the natural thing for her. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think so much of that like is true just on an individual basis. Like, you know, the church that you grow up in might not be one that, you know, when you sit down and you really, you know, read through the scripture yourself, that you might, you know, find yourself aligning with the most.
Mhm.
Politically, like maybe you do your own research, not necessarily what you've been taught in school or whatever, and
What you
you
read on social media.
what you read on social media, and you know you might find, you know, your own kind of little niche area,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I think it's important to once again show grace, because you know I don't think we are ever at our final forms of being, you know, like we are
Yeah.
constantly evolving, and you know we might have an opinion on something and then 5 years later our opinion is something totally different. And so if we're always changing and always growing, and the world around us also is changing and growing, like
Yeah.
um, to just show grace to each other and just know that, you know, there's more to somebody than, you know, political beliefs or spiritual beliefs, and being
Yeah.
willing to take the time to get to know them for themselves.
I couldn't agree more. So my last question for you this morning is, what message of hope do you want your readers to walk away with?
So I think, you know, the biggest message of hope is that, like we mentioned before, no matter how bad things get, that, you know, like you mentioned, God is always on the throne.
Mhm.
God has a plan, and nobody can tamper with that plan. It is going to go on no matter what. So having hope in that, and then also having hope in each other, and our willingness to overcome things together, you know, relationally or nationally. Um, you know, there's always room for improvement, and there's always a chance for improvement, and opportunity for improvement. And yeah, you know, we are not our darkest moment, I guess,
So
is
true.
the hope that I want to kind of convey through this book.
Well, Emily, it has been so much fun chatting with you this morning and learning about If I Go. Can you tell our readers and our viewers where they can find more information about you?
Yeah, so If I Go is on Amazon and the Kindle store. I have a website, authoremilyAnn.com. And then I'm also on Instagram as author Emily Ann. On my website, I have a free ebook if somebody wants to kind of get a taste of my writing without committing to buying the book. I have the perspective of Fred, his mother, when he goes off to war, kind of
Oh,
her like spiritual journey, coming to terms with like, this is my son, but like he's also God's. And I need to be willing to give him to God and just trust that God has a plan for this. So
um,
that is the free ebook on my website, if people want to check that out. And then on Instagram, I am giving updates and things on, you know, my next books that are coming out and stuff like that. So
great. I am headed to Amazon for the book and to your website for the free story because I'm already hooked. I can't wait to read this
oh,
book.
oh, thank you so much.
Well, it was great talking with you. Thank you so much. Congratulations on the
Thank
release
you.
of your debut novel, and we can't wait to see what's coming from you next.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I had such a fun time talking with you.
You're so welcome.